So there's some things I wanted to go over, and I'll get to those in a second from chapter 3. But more importantly, it's very interesting that she switches from the moment she sees all these papers that shows the lies of Area X, she suddenly switches over to my third and best field assignment out of college. And then you have to wonder yourself, why does she choose to add this now? And again, whenever she's about to mention her husband, she always reveals something about her past first. So you want to take note of that. That usually means that she's trying to distract you from the fact that she's about to be subjective, right? This is her moment where she is subjective. I noticed that when she talks about her past, she does so in a subjective way. She doesn't talk about it necessarily in an objective way. Even though that's the tone she wants to give, that's usually never the way it goes. In most cases, it's extremely uncanny in the way that she does this. So, she actually doesn't say that much. She does talk about the fact that they would say to her, "Oh, that's just the old biologist." And she's like, "Well, maybe that is me. Maybe I am the old biologist, just like all these people who I'm looking at the papers of." But I think it's more of a distraction rather than talking about something important, because on page 109, just about a page and a half later, she says, "Reality encroaches you in other ways too. At some point during our relationship, my husband began to call me the ghost bird. Very important for the second and third book, and certainly kind of important here as well, right? It would be said with a kind of creasing at the corner of his lips. I could see the reproach, so he does it to really kind of piss her off. Ghost bird, he would say later. Did you have fun? I'd nod and smile. Yet, even as my husband wanted me to be assimilated in a sense, the irony was that he wanted to stand out. Seeing that huge pile of journals, this was another thing I thought of. His account couldn't possibly stand out. That, in the end, he'd be reduced to a state approximating my own, but like we had already mentioned, nope, she's gonna find it. Most definitely. But what is important and what I didn't mention before happens and occurs on page 115, in which she reads one journal and finds out that at the lighthouse there's been some kind of attack on these people there. I don't know what attack it is. The reader doesn't really know. And it says soon afterwards the account trailed off. If it had a distinctly unreal quality to it, uncanny, as if a fictionalized version of a real event. I tried to imagine what Area X might have looked like so long ago. I couldn't. So, there we go. So now we're going to move on to chapter 4, which is called Immersion. So remember what we had before? We had the INs. We had Integration, which is chapter 2, and Initiation, which is chapter 1, Emulation, IM, and then chapter 4, Immersion. So immersion is when you put yourself into something and become a part of it. Very important. She is now becoming a part of Area X. The part of who she was in chapter 3 is slowly dissolving. She's becoming a part of Area X now. And more than anything that's about to happen is she's going to be the last one standing. Or I should say the last of the expedition standing. So in chapter 4, one of the big things, of course, is control yet again. Control plays a central role in this case, because in her last conversation with the psychologist, something is going to happen, right? Some things are going to be revealed that maybe she didn't want to know. The psychologist came from my observations during training. She was like a kind of distant overseer, kind of like a scientist, right? That's what she does. In a more personal role as our confessor. So if you have anything to say it now. So here she gives some examples. Tell me about your parents. What are they like? She would ask. A classic opening gambit. Normal, I replied, trying to smile when thinking. Distant, impractical, irrelevant, moody, useless. So notice that she controls herself. Again, the idea of control deals with power, right? The psychologist wants to gain some understanding so that she has better firm control over the biologist. But the biologist is very resistant, right? Your mother is an alcoholic, correct? And your father is a kind of con man. I almost exhibited a lack of control. She almost gives in at what seemed like an insult, not an insight. I almost protested defiantly. My mother is an artist, and my father is an entrepreneur. What are your earliest memories? Breakfast. So she's giving these one word answers that are not meant to inspire confidence in the psychologist, right? So the biologist is sticking to her own mind and she doesn't want the psychologist to get inside. A stuffed puppy I still have today. Putting a magnifying glass up to an antlion sinkhole. Kissing a boy and making him strip for me because I didn't know any better. Falling into a fountain and banging my head. The result? 5 stitches in the emergency room and a biting fear of drowning. Interesting, considering the fact that she always goes into the marine biology sort of areas, which she mentioned just previously. In the emergency room again, when mom drank too much, followed by the relief of almost a year of sobriety. Of all my answers, breakfast annoyed her the most. I could see it in the corners of her mouth finding the downward turn. Her rigid stance, the coldness in her eyes. But she kept her control. So again, this is very important. It's kind of foreshadowing what's about to happen. Both of them are very much leaders, and both of them like to have control over the situation. So both of them are controlling themselves, but they are also trying to control one another. Did you have a happy childhood? Normal, I replied. How close were you to your extended family? Close enough. How do you feel about being part of a team? Just fine. I've often been a part of teams. You were let go from a number of your field jobs. Do you want to tell me why? She knew why. So again I shrugged and said nothing. And here's the one that almost throws everything off. Are you only agreeing to join this expedition because of your husband? How close were you and your husband? How often did you fight? Why did you fight? Why didn't you call the authorities the moment you returned to your house? These sessions clearly frustrated the psychologist on a professional level. Her ingrained training, which was predicated on drawing personal information out of patients in order to establish trust and delve into deeper issues. In other words, in order to be able to psychologically condition them to the point where they can see things under her purview, she has to do a lot of work, right? And it's even more frustrating when it's hard for one of them to even follow along. Again, you are very self contained, but not as pejorative. It was only as we walked for a second day from the border that struck me that perhaps the very qualities she might disapprove of from a psychiatric point of view made me suitable for the expedition. But here she is. The psychologist is all alone. And of course, she's not in very good condition. And here we go. On page 124, the most important phrase shows up. And I will talk about that next. So I'm going to take a break now.